Hello and welcome to our webinar on the impacts of Intel, a development panel discussion with guest panelists from around the region. This is our second event of our Impacts of Intel summer series. My name is Jerica Logan and I am the outreach coordinator at the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis, otherwise known as CURA. I will be your host for this event. If you require closed captioning, you will find a subtitles box at the bottom of the screen called CC. Click on the box and select Show Subtitles. This will allow you to see the subtitles during the presentation. Please feel free to submit questions at any time during the webinar in the Q&A box. We will ask as many of the questions that you have, but if we do not get to your questions, we do apologize. If you have any additional questions following the event, please feel free to email me at logan.433@osu.edu. This event is approved for one AICP CM credit. To claim your CM credits, log into your My APA account on the APA website and enter in the event into your online log. There will also be a brief survey at the end of the webinar. If you have time, please feel free to provide your feedback. I am now going to pass it over to our director, Harvey Miller.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerica, and welcome everyone to today's webinar on the impacts of Intel, a development panel discussion. As Jerica said, this is part of a summer series we're having on this topic. What will be the impacts of Intel on Ohio and beyond? On July 29th, we'll have a panel discussion on transportation, and on August 5th, we'll have one on energy and water impacts. I also want to tell you to stay tuned for our autumn 2022 series event on Tech in the City. We are going to talk about how to use new urban data technologies to tell compelling science-based stories about urban challenges and their solutions, and how to improve community engagement. That'll happen during fall semester here at Ohio State. So you can like us on Facebook, you can follow us on Twitter, or check out our events page at cura.osu.edu. So now I'd like to introduce our all-star panel here to talk about the impacts of Intel on development. And first, I'd like to introduce Darla Munroe. Darla Munroe is professor and chair in the Department of Geography at The Ohio State University. Although beginning August 15th, she will be director of research at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we will miss her very much, I must say. She also serves on the scientific steering committee of the Global Land Program and as co-editor-in-chief, of the Journal of Land Use Science. She is an economic and human environmental geographer with research interest in economic environmental interactions, especially forested ecosystems at the urban-rural interface on a global scale. She has worked for 2 decades to understand land use change and the associated social and environmental implications using geospatial analytical methods, statistical models, and qualitative research methods. Second, Bill Lafayette. Bill offers more than 25 years of experience in economic analysis and development. Before founding Regionomics in 2011, he spent 12 years as Vice President of Economic Analysis with the Columbus Chamber of Commerce and 4 years with Rickenbacker Port Authority. Previously, he was full-time faculty member at Ashland University and the University of North Texas. He is currently adjunct faculty member of The Ohio State University's John Glenn College of Public Affairs. Bill earned a PhD in real estate economics from The Ohio State University in 1994. He also holds an MBA in investment management and a BS in finance and accounting from Wright State University. And he's a frequent flyer here in CURA panels. This is panel number 4 for him. So we appreciate your support, Bill, once again. Ted Geer, as program manager at One Columbus, Ted manages implementation of the Intel project and the semiconductor industry across the Columbus region. This includes construction of a leading-edge microchip factory in Licking County, the recruitment of dozens of suppliers to support production, and planning for related growth across the Columbus region. Ted is an accomplished regional development professional with an experience in a wide range of economic development, public policy, long-range planning, transportation, and public finance issues at every level of government. And he has a passion for strengthening regional systems that support the Columbus regional residents and businesses. Prior to joining One Columbus, Ted spent time at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission as Economic Development and Infrastructure Officer and at the Greater Houston Partnership in Government Affairs and Policy. And finally, last but not least, is Mark Partridge. Mark Partridge is the C. William Swank Chair of Rural Urban Policy Studies and a professor in the Department of Agricultural, Environmental, and Development Economics at The Ohio State University. He is also an economic consultant at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, adjunct professor at Jinan University in Guangzhou, China, and at Gran Sasso Science Institute in Italy. Dr. Partridge's current research interests include investigating regional economic growth, urban spillovers on rural economies, why regions grow at different rates, and spatial differences in income equality and poverty. So as I said, we have an all-star panel here. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. And what we'll do is we'll start off with just opening comments, about 3 to 5 minutes from each panelist in that order. So Darla, I hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Harvey, and really looking forward to this discussion with this esteemed group. So as Harvey mentioned, I study environment economy relationships and particularly how big economic shifts mean new land development. So we might look at this issue of the Intel plant and its medium and long range effects from a social and environmental sustainability perspective, which would lead us to think about the costs and benefits and how those are distributed across people and what the impacts might be for my interest on farm and forest land. I'm going to make a couple of points on the economic geography of industrial production and then more on the land development side. So we've lived in an increasingly footloose world, so to say, since the 1980s, and cheap oil or the end of cheap oil and climate change are putting some constraints on the outsourcing, offshoring trends that we saw in prior decades. However, domestic moves, right, so across the country, in a place as large as the US, can be qualitatively as important as some of these big international changes. And so thinking about costs and benefits, right, so we quickly zero in on the various subsidies that plants like Intel are promised. So there are federal subsidies on microchips. There are local tax breaks, right? Moving to the central Ohio region, seeking cheap land, cheap labor. And we know that there was some posturing at the federal level that this sort of threat that if we weren't able to make this work in the US, the plant could be moved to Europe, South Korea, China, India. And so there's a concept in economic geography that we use a lot called a race to the bottom. So which location is going to ask for the least contribution from Intel? And the flip side of that is what bargaining leverage do regions and communities have to make the relationships, right, the social and infrastructural economic investments work. So I have some concerns about the imbalance of power there. But thinking about land development, it's useful to kind of look back a little bit. In the 1970s, I've been told by those who were here then, there was only really a discussion of Columbus, and then the surrounding areas were rural or small communities. Roughly around 1990s, you get the first common use of the term Central Ohio, right, as a regional concept that people understood as an integrated rural urban system. And globally, certainly nationally, cities have become much more decentralized, gobbling up farmland in many cases. And we often forget what's going on with the rural areas. So on the rural side, there's a much broader scope or broader field that are integrated into these urban economies. And sometimes these complexities are really dynamic. So for example, at the urban rural fringe, one family member could remain in farming only because a second family member has a job at a place like the Intel plant where they get their health insurance. So there's really interesting dynamics and complexities here, and it's hard to make sweeping generalizations. But specifically what I've been looking at with my students lately is thinking about wealth inequality in urban rural spaces. So I would say wealth inequality, second or combined with climate change is the greatest existential threat on Earth at this time. That's not hyperbole, I don't think. We know in cities you have pockets of wealthy neighborhoods, pockets of poverty, and when investment happens, investment begets investment, and sometimes pulls tax dollars with it. So newly developed neighborhoods, so people move outside the city for larger lot sizes, bucolic landscapes, jobs, retail, healthcare services, school funding goes with them. So our recent research shows that these dynamics are also happening in rural areas in Ohio. So high valued areas where the wealthiest people have moved, mid-range areas of middle income that are really dynamic. So people commuting from Pickerington, right, to work up in Powell, for example. And I know Harvey cares a lot about this. So I think we, need to factor those transportation effects in that he's going to look at later this summer. And then there are low income areas of opportunities. So we've been promised a lot of technology transfer or spillover from this plant in the form of connections to universities and community colleges, whether that's going to provide job training. I think we really need to kind of look at that and look at it in a place specific manner. So who's going to benefit? So looking at medium or low income areas in the state, there are these areas of opportunities where investment, can bring some tax dollars, can bring some educational or job opportunities, but then that can exacerbate the rural poverty pockets. So what about those other places in Ohio that are not easily accessible, right, to this plant or to all the many investments that will follow it? And what that means on a state level. Again, particularly in this context of the tax breaks that we offer. So as we know, Columbus City Schools has been in litigation with Nationwide Arena, right? I don't know when or if that ever got settled. So actually holding employers on the hook to kind of pay back the communities where increasingly meager promises were made is a really big issue. And so kind of seeing some of the things that have been happening in Columbus the last couple of decades play out on the urban rural fringe will be, to say the least, will bring lots of interesting research opportunities. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Darla. Great. Lot to chew on there. Bill, what do you think about all this?
Thanks for having me here. As Harvey said, I own a consultancy called Regionomics, and I bill it as an economic and workforce strategy firm. And so my focus areas are analyzing and forecasting in community and or regional setting, economic development, workforce development, fiscal analysis for local governments, and economic impact analysis. And obviously, Intel impinges on all of those. I started thinking about what the implications of Intel were going to be for our region pretty much as soon as the announcement was made. At first, I was doing it more or less out of curiosity, and also because this is such an enormous opportunity and we must get it right. I've actually since been hired to do that projection a little bit more formally. And I'm also a board member of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. And so I am collaborating with the staff there to think about what this could mean for us. So I'm also interested in the incentives piece. I did a comprehensive study last year for Columbus City Council, the Franklin County Auditor, looking at the ins and outs of tax incentives. And so I'm very eager for that part of the discussion to come up. So thank you all for having me.
Thanks for coming back, Bill. Ted, you have a lot of experience with large economic development projects now, including Intel. Give us your perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me, CURA. I'm really excited to talk about this project today, and really excited to talk about it in an Ohio State University panel, because this is really a statewide opportunity with statewide impacts. And so, even beyond the Columbus region, which is my day today, we're working with Jobs Ohio, the administration, plenty of other statewide partners to really suss out, how to maximize, the opportunities, again, really statewide, inclusive of all the regions and all of the, characters across the state. So I'm going to step back a little bit on this project just to kind of reframe it up a little bit. Intel is the only major U.S. chip maker, only major U.S. manufacturer of semiconductor chips. They have existing operations mostly on the West Coast in Oregon, outside of Portland, and in Arizona, outside of Phoenix. And those facilities are quite large. Ours has a chance to grow larger over time. Most of the numbers I'm going to mention today, as we're talking about this project, are the first phase. That's what's been publicly announced, and we will have to compete for any future phases if Intel were to decide to expand. So, kind of with that said, microchips are really important to our entire modern way of life. They enable more or less the entire innovative capacity of humanity as a species. They are in everything from PCs to all of our communications equipment, most advanced industrial manufacturing equipment, digitizing of the industrial segment, automotive, which is a key sector for the Columbus region with Honda of North America headquartered here, and defense. We'll get into some of the national security implications of this project, I'm sure, but it's worth noting that most major US defense systems and platforms require advanced microchips. Ohio is really answering a national call to action and really future-proofing our regional economy. When you think about a manufacturing project, generally, you couldn't choose a better one than this. This is really, we want to go local, regional, state, national, international. This is exactly the project that you would want. There's a lot of work to enable it, and I'm really excited. We have great partnerships. Licking County in particular has really rallied to the flag here, and we're really getting some good pieces in place to do this maybe in a more contemplated way than you see in a Portland or a Phoenix. Those were more iterative over 40 years. Really not master plan in the way that we have an opportunity to do here. So looking forward to talking more about it. Thanks.
Thanks, Ted. Sounds promising. Mark, you're an economist who specializes in urban-rural policy. Give us your perspective.
Right. I've done a lot of work on this. In fact, I'm kind of the grumpy economist. There's the word is never invite two to one party. Some social expert once said, because we ruin the party, and then you throw in I have a perfect face for radio. But what I do want to say is I'm going to be a wet blanket, and I think I'm going to represent pretty well 90% of the economic profession. And so my master's thesis back in 1987, which I'm sure everybody on this has read, was really enthusiastic about this. And that was, so this has been around for decades, exactly this kind of economic development. And then it was the Massachusetts Miracle and Michael Dukakis, and I was really excited. And I would have been somebody, if you would have asked me, say in 1990, I would have been for. Though with a lot of experience, this has been tried dozens and dozens and dozens of times, and very rarely it's succeeded, all over the world, all sorts of hopes and so forth. I started to wonder whether my research was correct. So why does a strategy of dumping lots of money from government, from taxpayers to a private company is not good strategy? Why does that tend to fail? There's so many ways that I could go into this of why government's not a bad winners. This is about can't pick winners. It isn't about Intel, but so I'm not even going to go into all of them. But one is the public always forgets that the roughly $4 billion, from the state that we now found out is now another $1 billion more than what they originally announced, from locally, which is going to be massive, roughly $4 billion could have been spent elsewhere. Could have been spent on schools. Could have been spent on lowering taxes. It could have been spent on a lot of ways, which generally probably would have had better luck with. Probably would have had a higher rate of return. My experience with incentives is I'd rather go to Vegas. It's not like you lose every time, but I think you'd have a better odds if you go to Vegas. So that's one of the things the public forgets. From a national perspective, we offer a company a lot of money. They move from the West, where their supply chain is, near their Asia supply chain. Intel here It's not the most productive place for Intel to locate, way away from their supply chain. Basically, in these things, why economists say, basically incentives lower the national GDP. They move companies from where they would have been the most productive to where they're less productive. From the local level, there's just no link. I've looked at Site Selection Magazine, which if you're a practitioner lists the large firms and counts that located in each state, which state got large firms. There's no link between landing large firms and state economic outcomes. There's a lot of other things that are going on. Other locally, the benefits have been vastly overstated. I could put I can go into this later why I would professionally be fine with this number, but the number of permanent jobs, 4,500, would be probably what would be a good consensus using the best economic analysis today. It basically, we could go through complex models that I could explain that shows that basically the winners are Intel tax, stock owners and landowners. They're not the workers. They're not the capital. And I could talk about why that's the case. And basically it crowds out economic activity that would have occurred. Recently, we did a peer-reviewed study in my group, and we found that subsidies, places that give more subsidies have fewer new business startups. And even in high tech, you give subsidies in high tech, you have fewer high tech startups. In other words, it crowds out economic behavior. And that is really important because new firms disproportionately create more jobs than existing firms do. They're also the cradle of more innovation disproportionately, and crowding out new firms is not the road to prosperity. That's going to hurt. We've done other studies. For example, one thing that people haven't talked about, but I think Harvey and Darla were implying, we're going to have higher housing costs. People are going to say, Columbus is kind of expensive. I'm going to move elsewhere. We're going to lose population. We offset, we're going to lose some population there. And that's going to pull down, you get a positive effect from Intel. I'm starting to knock it down to where we'll probably be pretty close to net zero. And so, as you can see, this is like 2 lectures, and I would have a lot to say why economists don't like this, but I'll turn it back to the panel.
Okay, think that we have a contrary opinion, and this will lead to a very good panel discussion. So let's drill down to some of these issues, let everyone have a bit of a say on it. So let's start with this basic question. Again, we've heard claims that the Intel development will generate, directly 7,000 construction jobs, 3,000 highly skilled, well-paid workers, and ultimately both direct and indirect 20,000 new jobs. Do we believe those claims? I think we heard Mark's opinion. Let's let Bill jump in, and then Ted.
Well, Jobs Ohio says that Intel has 140 existing suppliers in Ohio, and they expect something like 30 to 40 more. Now, my guess is, and this is only a guess, is that these new suppliers are going to be spread throughout the state rather than being concentrated here. And there are both workforce, economic, and also political reasons for that. It doesn't do well for the folks in Cleveland or Toledo or Cincinnati to see that Columbus has gotten yet another plum. So I have a feeling that when those offers start popping up, they'll be directed elsewhere other than here, although we are certainly going to get our share.
But the overall impacts, what do you think? In terms of jobs?
Well, I actually looked at the regional impact modeling system, RIMS2 multipliers for Ohio and also Columbus, and I was absolutely shocked to see that there's a multiplier in the Columbus MSA's numbers for microchip production, and it's 2.7. And that means that 3,000 direct workers translates to about 8,100 jobs in total. And those are direct workers, suppliers to the plant, and suppliers to the households too. And then you have a construction multiplier right at 2, which means that the 7,000 direct jobs lead to 14,000 jobs total. Now, Mark is certainly going to jump in and talk about the shortcomings of economic impact analysis.
Oh,
as I
yeah, if you
certainly
want.
hope he will. But the couple things to remember is, first of all, those 7,000 construction jobs are not going to happen all at once. And second, we actually have to find the bodies, and that may be the biggest rub.
Ted, what do you think?
Sure, thanks. So this is an industry that is quite mature. It's been around for over 50 years. It's involved in major capital expenditures, workforce development efforts globally, everywhere from China, Taiwan, Japan, Southeast Asia, Malaysia, for instance, Ireland, Germany, Israel. This is a truly global sector. Again, that is fairly advanced. It's one of the more advanced manufacturing sectors you will ever find. And these microchips are some of the most complex things that we've ever made. And so I say all that to say that there's a reasonable sense of the impacts of these sorts of investments. They've been pressure tested and stress tested in many different contexts, US and international. I'm inclined to believe these numbers, and I think they're going to be great jobs. And furthermore, the company is committing to these jobs. This is more than a handshake. This is more than an understanding. This is an agreement and a commitment from the company to Ohio. So I'm looking forward to all of these. The other point that I'd like to make, and this is more of an intangible. This is maybe not on the bottom line, but this industry is vital to national security again, and the West Coast is much more exposed, has more geopolitical exposure than Ohio does, has more natural disaster risk than Ohio does. We are in one of the most climate resilient and lowest natural disaster risk regions of the country here in central Ohio, and that's one of the key reasons why we're seeing elevated investment of industrial capital across the board, not just microchips. In fact, the area of Licking County where this project is cited is one of the seismologically most neutral points in the country. You're talking about nanometer scale manufacturing, which is so seismological dimensions are important. So all that to say that there's a lot more to this than what's on the sheet. That being said, these are numbers that are very, very well tested out. Thanks.
Harvey, do you mind if I just briefly explain why where I come from my numbers?
Sure, but then I want to give Darla a chance, so just make it brief, please.
Yeah, right. I just wanted to say that one is that Bill was referring to certain kind of predictions, which I don't necessarily disagree with. What they miss, completely 100% miss, is the kind of offsetting effects that happen. Manufacturers that can no longer competitive because wages are bid up and then they move elsewhere. They don't count the lack of new firms opening up and so on. Also, I have 35 years of this. Whenever there's a new project, I don't care, Intel, Ford, oil companies, they always put out these massive numbers, and they're just just ridiculous. And economists just roll their eyes. Then you do ex post, well, what actually happened, and they're never even remotely come to what was promised. In this, so there's 3,000 permanent jobs. Tim Bartik at Upjohn's probably considered the expert in estimating impacts of this. He looked at this statistically, others have. He found a multiplier of around 1.5 to 2. That means every job Intel creates directly, there'll be another job, another half a job to another job. In other words, and also he pointed out if you lack a supply chain, which generally we do. I mean, there might be some supplier, some small supplier somewhere, but if you lack the supply chain, which is out in the West and from Asia for this, you're good. Tim found much smaller multipliers. So, I mean, this is based, peer-reviewed kind of work. This isn't from some consultant that's out there. So, and then finally, I think construction's a great idea, great example of why there's crowding out. If you have 7,000 construction jobs, we have a shortage of construction workers. If Intel's using them, that means they won't be available to build houses or build other projects. There won't be, in total, there won't be 7,000 new construction workers. And so, these kind of offsets start adding up. And that's why, the effects, start dwindling away.
Okay. I want to hand over to Darla, but I want to pivot to a little bit of a different question because it came up. You, in your opening comments, you raised climate change as an existential. And Ted just mentioned that, there may be climate reasons for to move chip manufacturing here because of water, more seismically stable, and part of this also is because of wanting to onshore chip manufacturing, right? The national security issue. So just as an economic geographer and someone who's interested in the environment, how much do you think all these other things are driving this?
Yeah, so a few things. Yeah, and I'd already actually jotted that in the notes that I was making. I do want to say I agree with, I think, everything that Mark had to say, and particularly to talk about displacement impacts in jobs, and where that, but okay, so climate change, it's very interesting. And again, we just do not have the appetite locally, regionally, or nationally to have this conversation about environmental limits, right, to what we do, and reasonably investing in climate solutions. We've kicked environmental policy up to the federal level for the most part, and now we're kind of chipping away at that incrementally. And so these are not separable environment economy questions. It's all interwoven, but we always frame things as economics at the local level, right? That it's, you can't eat money, et cetera. So noticing how we sidestep the environment when we're talking about city or regional questions is something I think we should pay more attention to. So regarding the climate, I mean, and I do agree with you, Ted, semiconductors, like that all the potential industrial sort of benefits and wanting to be leaders in these areas, I am totally sympathetic to all of those arguments. It's interesting about being a climate resilient region, more or less, but of course, climate variability versus kind of average. But so I just want to point out that is also beneficial to our agricultural lands and our forest lands. So we have healthier forests than most of the rest of the Northeast. We have a longer growing season. We've got a lot of kind of, really, really good precipitation happening in the springtime, right? So, and again, I'm not saying that ag or forest-based production is going to offset, right, semiconductors, right, or whatever, but kind of looking at that full regional accounting of climate impacts is really important, and we're not doing that. And then just the final point I want to make is really kind of looking at what happened with Honda. Because I think there's some real clear parallels there. So bringing the Honda plant to Ohio, right, where the land was cheap and the labor was cheap. And that was, about those two things more than anything else. It has been a mixed bag. There clearly have been benefits, but kind of regarding the land development, it sucked a lot of development and thickened these corridors, right, between Columbus and Marysville. Is it Marysville? There's too many M. Yes, thank you. And again, sucked tax dollars out of Columbus schools, out of at the cost of paying for those road infrastructure improvements to keep it going. So anyway, I would just like to see kind of a full accounting of all of those costs and benefits that's very spatially explicit.
Okay, let's actually talk about this. I may ask you to jump in on this as well, and then we can go to the other panelists. So this plant will be located in New Albany. What will that economic wave spreading out from New Albany look like, both in terms of positive and negative dimensions of it? I mean, where do we expect to see developmental impacts, both positive and negative? Can you comment on that, Darla, and then we can perhaps go to the other panelists? I mean, will it really have the statewide footprint?
I'm sorry, can someone else jump in first? I was thinking through I was looking at the questions. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Let's see. Bill, then Ted.
Well,
Bill and Ted.
one thing to remember is that downtown Columbus is a 30-minute drive from the site. And so there may be a concentration of households in the vicinity of the plant. A lot of that depends on the policies of local governments, because there is a lot of NIMBY out there. And so whether Johnstown explodes or not is largely up to the leaders of Johnstown, which ultimately depends on what the citizens of Johnstown who vote for them or not think. And so those are questions that we really don't have answered yet. Development goes where it's most convenient to go. And it also depends too, another question that I've been thinking about but haven't yet answered. What are these workers going to look like? What are their demographics? Because there may be folks who prefer a more rural lifestyle, and then there may be folks who want to live in the short north or downtown Columbus and make that 30-minute reverse commute. We just don't completely know that yet, although there are ways, I think, to figure that out. One thing, though, that I need to bring up, I wanted to bring this up before, and I really should, is that we can't count on any of this until we see the whites of their eyes. Yeah, there are commitments and so forth. There were commitments with, what was it, Foxconn too? And that we saw what happened there. So we need to think and plan as if this is going to happen. But we need to steel ourselves to the possibility that it still may not. So that was kind of rambling. I'm not sure if I really answered the question.
Well, I'll direct it to Ted now and say, well, Ted, how do we ensure that these benefits are spread fairly and the negative consequences aren't?
Sure. So, one of the things as I think about those communities, exurban and rural communities in Licking County, in Knox County, Fairfield County, Coshocton, Muskingum, all of, the broader area out to the northeast of Columbus, this is a different conversation if we are in a region that is shrinking, that's economy is languishing. Those communities in those areas are facing a very difficult calculus. Aging infrastructure, falling revenues, a declining population. Growth is not a cure-all or anything even close. It is a necessary but not sufficient factor in approaching some of these problems and solving them. Beyond that, talking about individual communities and their futures, because of that growth, because of the resources that we expect to come in, this is a chance for them to decide what they want to be. And to Bill's point, if they want to be a community that caters to those employees who want to live on 40 acres with a farmhouse, that's great. That is well within their options. As he said, whether Johnstown explodes is up to Johnstown. This is a planning dimension. This is a growth dimension. We see comprehensive plans being updated across Licking County right now. There's an incredible public-private partnership through the Evans Foundation in Licking County that has stood up in the last month that is really rallying all those comprehensive plan updates together to make sure that when you cross borders, you're not, seeing markedly different goals and layouts. So all that to say, this is a rare opportunity for many of those communities that nearly all of their peers across the Midwest do not have. The Columbus Metro is #1 in the Midwest for STEM talent growth, for job growth, for GDP growth, for population growth. And again, those are all tools in a toolbox. They're not the answer, but they are part of the solution.
Okay, Darla, do you have any comments? I want to actually turn to our audience questions and just
yeah. And sorry, I was digesting what was in the questions. I wasn't ready. And there is a comment here. There's a question about Honda and Marysville and comparing the 80s. I mean, it's really, really interesting. Any city that I've ever studied, how spatially variable kind of new growth is funneled or channeled. So there's clearly like an upstream downstream effect in Columbus. We know that high valued real estate is not going to be near the dump or the water treatment areas, and so comparing Marysville to Licking County, right, is it gonna, are there going to be that much more super high valued residential or retail developments that are going to happen there? And then I also think, and that's the sort of question, I don't really have the answer to that. I think, possibly, well, looking at small communities to the north, it's a really interesting balance when you have families making a decision between living in Upper Arlington or living in Powell or Lewis Center, right? Because they're going to have to pay really, really high property taxes to get the quality of schools that they want in Upper Arlington, whereas Lewis Center, if it's growing, but it's growing with households significantly above the median income, they can offer these fabulous services, at a fraction of the property tax rate. And so, when you have really uneven growth and the variations in kind of the households, the demographics, the income status, and what that means for local tax districts and how that can get reinvested, you could have really big distributional effects. So I would imagine that the Licking County will be kind of following investment, and probably at the expense of some of the city of Columbus, but other outlying areas.
Okay, thanks. Mark, any comments on this before I turn it over to Jerica and she can field some of the audience questions?
I'll just be real quick. I'll try. I am a professor. But first, I just want to quickly just say, semiconductors, gosh, I've been following them since the late 70s. And in the 80s, big argument, US dominated then. We totally dominated the manufacturing, but it was moving to Japan. And so there are legitimate national security issues, which I don't know the answer. Are they a waste of money or not? I'm agnostic. Where you'll get economists just utterly rolling their eyes is, why should Ohio pay $4 billion for US? Why isn't this the nation paying $4 billion if national security, which it's a legitimate concern? But in terms of the jobs,
there is a big bill in front of Congress right now. Remember, a $52 billion bill.
Right. And I would say, if this is a great plant, there's your source of incentives. So, but not Ohio taxpayers. But I was going to say, though, in terms of jobs, it is true. If you looked at, last night I looked, this May, Bureau of Labor Statistics, nationally, the semiconductor industry pays for all workers about $1,926 a week. However, semiconductors isn't like autos, where blue collar workers are making that. It's a lot more equal in most of manufacturing. Semiconductors, it's really unequal. So the average production worker, about 60% of what these jobs will be, they will be making, the national average is $1,064 a week. It's basically what you see across all manufacturing. In other words, 60% of the jobs will be your typical manufacturing jobs. It's the other 40% of the jobs, that's where, the high average is. And that, that's somewhere around $4,000 a week or so forth. But so my point is that it is, yes, high average wage, but it's not going to everybody. 60% of you just getting your typical manufacturing wage.
Can I jump in on that? Because I've looked at that a little bit. I pulled together a list of the top 24 occupations that it's going to need, and those are actually posted on Regionomics LLC Facebook page if you're interested. And those 24 occupations account for 2,100 of the 3,000 promised jobs. Half of those only require a high school diploma plus training. And so we hear this $135,000 average wage bandied about. That's a mean. It is not a median. And for technical reasons, that 135,000 overestimates by a factor that I haven't figured out yet, overestimates what the typical worker is going to earn. And so not all these folks are going to live in Lewis Center or Upper Arlington or New Albany. Not all of them are going to be able to. Relatively few probably will.
And I'll jump in there as well, if that's all right.
Yeah, I was going to turn it over to you to respond,
Sure.
please.
So yeah, you're absolutely right, Bill. It's one of the things that really excites me about this project. I'm glad we dove into this number. You have under one roof everywhere from 2-year certificate semiconductor manufacturing technicians to PhD electrical engineers. And it's a very, very cool facility because of that. I also wanted to mention another sort of impact of this project. The semiconductor sector invests more of their revenues in R&D than any other industrial sector in the world. It's about right around 20% generally. And that is going to drive all sorts of related activities. I'm sure Ohio State will certainly participate in some of that, as well as the rest of our schools, technical schools, 4-year, 2-year across the state. One of the first things Intel did, and this again is getting to that workforce need that they have, one of the first things they did after the announcement was announce $50 million directly into Ohio higher education systems. That was matched by $50 million from the National Science Foundation for a national RFP. Now, Intel ran that $50 million specifically within Ohio through an RFP process that closed a couple of weeks ago. We probably won't see any results from that for a little while as they go through responses, work out contracts, et cetera. But that again illustrates just how important the workforce need is in this industry. It's ramping up very quickly. It's about a 6% annual growth rate for the semiconductor sector. The last 2 years, we've all seen the chip shortages that have driven that growth rate north of 15 to 20%. So, this is a moment where this industry is scaling rapidly, and those manufacturing jobs, those semiconductor manufacturing technicians. There are many folks that we talk to across the state that remember when those sorts of jobs left Ohio, and 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 years ago, and remember that plant in their town that's a distant memory. And it's really exciting to see them coming back. If you look at one of these factories, I really encourage folks to get on Google Street View around their facility in Chandler, Arizona, or in Hillsboro, Oregon. They look almost like convention centers, sort of. There's no smokestacks. There's no, big pipes coming out of them. They're very clean, modern facilities. Of course, that's because they are clean rooms. They're literally sealed up in the inside to enable this manufacturing. So all that to say that these are very, very cool American manufacturing jobs, and they're just the sort of thing that many have lamented our state losing for the last few decades.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to encourage the audience to tune into our energy and water impact panel discussion in August to talk about some of those issues surrounding these jobs and the impact on our environment. I'm now going to turn it over to Jerica Logan, who will go through some of the audience questions. Jerica, please.
So we have a couple of questions that are pretty similar. If you don't exactly see what you're looking for, it might be in a different question. So the first one is, Ted is making several great points on why Ohio. If these are the case, such as climate impacts, why is this level of incentive necessary? Locating here is already in the business's best interest.
Yeah, glad to speak to that. So this industry is one that is subsidized internationally. We are up against, as a nation, as the United States, and again, bringing in the national security dimension, understanding how important that is here. We're up against countries, China. It's about 75% cheaper to build one of these in China than it is here. It's about 30 to 40% cheaper to build them in Southeast Asia or Taiwan than it is here. And that's all because of the existing ecosystems that exist there, that we're doing the hard work right now to stand up here in Ohio. And again, it's direct government subsidies. If indeed national security is an imperative, if onshoring is an imperative, this is a competitive necessity, and certainly you could, we can parse out the local, state, and federal, and think about how that's distributed, and envision how we might change that going forward. As I said, this is a major moment for industrial capital investment. The fundamentals of our region are not changing that I mentioned. They're not going to change anytime soon. So we're going to remain attractive for this stuff. So all that to say that we are up against heavily subsidized manufacturing internationally, and that's what really necessitates it. Thanks.
Thank you. And then, so another question is, Bill brought up the point that finding contractors or workers to build the factories is going to be difficult. What is that going to do for development in other areas outside of the Columbus region? Not only is there going to be a limitation of workers, but will it also be supply?
Oh, I think so. Mark brought that point. I think that I think there's a potential for massive dislocations if we're not careful. As he said, and it's very correct, we already have a shortage of manufacturing or of construction workers in the region. So a lot of these folks, and I would imagine a fair number of the permanent jobs too, are going to have to be filled by imported workers. I don't mean necessarily from overseas, I mean from elsewhere in the country. That is going to shift the focus of construction work from home building, which we need if these folks are coming in from other places to staff these jobs. And it's going to create a need for housing for the construction workers. And I hope that we're beginning to think through that, because the implications of all this, given that we already have a shortage of housing, are things that I am really, really worried about.
Great, thank you. If anybody else wants to jump in, does anybody else have anything? Okay, so
Can I just add real quickly? That is, I just want to say that one of the things that like economists will note that this is a somewhat subsidized industry around the world. It's like I noted, it's in, I think Ted noted, it's in Vietnam. You can find it in villages, and that's why it's kind of become a commodity with less actual benefits. But the subsidy is actually an argument not to do it, in the context that if China wants Chinese taxpayers to pay for the semiconductors I use, China's subsidizing my computer, and thank you, Chinese taxpayers. However, I don't want my tax dollars subsidizing semiconductors that'll go to China that are going to cause lower prices in China. I think they're doing quite fine without taking my tax dollars. So, I just wanted to say that would be the argument economists would put forward.
But that's purely an economic argument, I just want to point out.
Yeah, and we're talking about economics.
Okay. There's other dimensions of the problem, but.
And then for our next question, can the panelists comment on effects of the new Intel plants? So not just the Ohio one, but for example, the one in Arizona and their implications?
Yeah, I'm sure Ted has something to say about this, but I did look at that a little bit, and it's interesting because from what I understand, right, there was a lot of the technology development that happened in Arizona in advance of the plant, and so they had these strong R&D connections there, and so that probably bodes better. So that's sort of an interesting question, is like whether the spillovers and these technology transfers, would be much stronger when that industrial connection has well been established.
Yeah, glad to speak to that as well. So, those industrial sectors that I mentioned that are supported by microchips in my opening comments, I'm going to run those back and consider these in the context of Ohio industry: automotive, advanced mobility, aerospace and aviation, consumer goods, data centers, defense, healthcare. They're all crucial to our state's economy. And this project is going to have a chance to really tie into and elevate a lot of the advanced manufacturing clusters that we see here bubbling up here already. EVs use 5 times more chips than internal combustion engine vehicles, for instance. We also have battery manufacturing and research and development that's bubbling up here. There's a lot of commonalities in this space between semiconductors, batteries, EVs, and all that other cutting edge sort of innovative manufacturing. So there's a good chance. And again, I'll also reiterate the R&D component too. There is a massive enterprise around research and development with this sector. So there are plenty of spillover effects. Yeah.
Thank you. So we only have a couple more minutes left, so I'm going to ask the next question. Municipalities may be well positioned to control housing growth, but what about the townships? Should we expect to see greenfield developments out of the townships, or are they likely to restrict housing development also?
Well, it really depends on the strength of the township's leadership. I conducted an economic development strategy for Delaware County half a dozen years ago, and as part of that, I interviewed as many township trustees as I could trap, and most of those folks were very eager to preserve the rural character of their township. So again, it really depends on what the leadership and ultimate voters want, with the point that everyone has a price.
Okay, would anybody like to add anything to that?
I would just add, again, that's what and it's complicated what that looks like in practice, but a nice rural landscape is going to increasingly be a luxury, right? And again, taking stock of the full spectrum of what rural landscapes look like in Ohio, right? And some are quite depressed and dilapidated and without the resources. So again, if it's funneling wealth like out of the city and elsewhere out of the countryside, that's a shame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I'm thinking this is going to be our last question. So the panel talked about the challenges of co-locating housing near the job site due to NIMBYism, local government decision-making, etc. Could they also discuss the land use implications of further outward growth and how that potentially relates to larger regional growth strategies like Insight 2050 and corridor concepts?
That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to jump in?
I can speak to it just very briefly. And again, this is one of the cool things about this metro with this project at this moment. You think about all the expertise we have on this panel right now, and if you step back to Honda in the 70s, the state of the practice of regional planning was very nascent. And, we have an opportunity now to, within this modern context, with a deeper understanding of economic geographies, with more interconnected, modern, innovative world, we have a chance to really approach this project differently and approach some of those questions differently. We're thinking about, certainly at One Columbus as a region, all of our partners, we're thinking about those corridors. We're thinking about, we're really carefully looking at our sites. We're probably going to be looking at infill sites more than we ever have before as a region over the next 10 to 20 years. So really that is going to drive a lot of those pieces. And again, this project is going to drive the resources that allow us to look at this stuff and come together and affect it. Thanks.
But are we doing that? I mean, this is happening right now. Are we doing that right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I would point to the efforts going on in Licking County. It's really incredible. Licking County is a member of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, where I was actually, before this job, I was at MORPC as their economic development officer. So, I've worked with them closely on strategic infrastructure development, on economic development strategy. This is something where there are good folks out there pulling these boats together, both on the ground and regionally. And I do see that work happening.
Others want to jump in on
Yeah,
that?
I'll just say that one issue that should be noted is that these giant subsidies means there's less money to pay for the impacts like schools, roads, so forth. And this is not an unusual problem. US Today did a wonderful series in 2019 on the impacts of the giant giga battery facility near Reno. And like just basic services they couldn't fund. I mean, they told the example where Tesla's battery company wanted them to come out, fire people to come out to their facility, and they say, hey, we don't have anybody. And so the issue of these kind of land use and public services are they're really important.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, we're out of time. lively discussion. Thank you all to all the panelists. As you can see, there's diverse viewpoints on this, and I think we'll have to all keep our eyes on this and understand that this is a complex development issue, and hope that we can move forward in the best way, and especially in a thoughtful way as this occurs. I want to remind the audience that we'll have 2 more panel discussions on this, July 29th on transportation impacts, and then finally August 5th on energy and water. So thank you, panelists. You were great. Thank you, audience, for participating in this discussion. And as always, stay tuned and be safe. Goodbye, everyone.